Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
We see the syphilitic shrinking obelisk, the white man's wilting dick. We see through dangling jowls of seedy game show trolls the smiling lie of the televised hive. The witches are watching with their thousand eyes. Witches are watching with their thousand eyes. We smell rotten teeth that speak beyond belief. A stick inside their skull would bring...
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 45. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun Ideas Podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. As far as Lee's Comics goes, I will be appearing at Lee's Comics booth at BerkeleyCon in Berkeley, California on November 3rd. Stop by and say hi and buy some of my books. I'm working on the same books as I said in recent podcast episodes, so I'll tell you some other things I'm working on. I'm also working on a Harvey mystery horror article for Back Issue magazine, and a Dick Tracy 90th anniversary article for Hogan's Alley magazine using information from today's interview with our guest coming up. I've also made some contributions for Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb's Freaky magazine, and I recently wrote an article about the revived Crazy magazine for Chet Reams. Our guest today has worked on a number of comic books as diverse as E-Man and Scooby-Doo. Since 2010, he's been the primary artist on Dick Tracy, the comic strip. And here he is, Joe Staton. And thank you for joining the show today. Before we go talking about Dick Tracy, I just wanted you to just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
Well, it's all tied together because when I was attracted to the comics pages, the strips, when I was still a little kid, and the story is that I was found in the kitchen floor when I was 3 or 4 trying to trace Dick Tracy and the Phantom. So I go back a long way with Tracy, and I kind of always thought, I should be drawing Dick Tracy. That's kind of it's follow along with me all along, and I just eventually wound up doing it. But in the meantime, I was always reading comics, especially the strips, and reading the comic books as well, and a lot of Dell Westerns and things like that in those days. And I went to school as an art major and headed off. I was in Tennessee. I went to school in Kentucky, and I headed off to New York to see if I could get into comics. And it kind of took a long time to get a break, but I finally did. And I've kind of been around since I guess around 70, 71. Making a living at it.
And that first break, was that at Charlton or a different publisher?
No, that was actually at Charlton.
Okay.
I had done one, maybe 2 jobs for Warren, but I don't really figure figure that as being a start or a break-in because it didn't really lead to anything. I actually started at Charlton the day after I got married.
Oh.
So it's that's a good way to keep track of that. We were very broke, and we were in New York, and we were heading out to Connecticut for kind of a day or two of a honeymoon, and Charlton was between New York and Connecticut, and was in Connecticut, and was on the way to Mystic. So I had my samples. We got in. We went in to see George Wildman and Salgen Timmy, and they saw my samples and decided they were going to give me a shot and gave me a ghost story with a good long deadline, and that was my first job. Actually, I got it in, good bit before the deadline. When we got back to Brooklyn, I could settle back into work and got it done. And they kept on sending me more stories after that. So that was like my actual start. Get in at Charlton, get a story, and keep on going.
Mm-hmm. And did you do work for like all their titles, or just kind of more the mystery and ghost titles that you're referring to?
It was mostly the ghost story, the mystery stuff. I think I did like one or two romances. Nobody really seemed to think I was cut out for romances. I did one or two pages of fillers for war books, but that didn't take. But it was always the mysteries and the ghost stuff. And so I was always up for that, like Ghost Manor, Mini Ghost of Dr. Graves. I don't know. There are 5 or 6 horror mystery books they did that I worked on.
Right. And I know a long time later you worked on Scooby-Doo for DC, but did you work on any of the Scooby-Doo when Charlton had the license, or no?
I didn't work on Scooby-Doo, but I did work on Wheelie and the Chopper Bunch.
Oh, boy.
which was a story about an adorable little car and his girlfriend, who was also a little car, and the trouble they had with a gang of rough motorcycles who interfered with their plans and chased them around. So actually, I did that. John Byrne actually worked on Wheelie as well. Mike DeFalco wrote some of those. So when I was working at Charlton, and for years after, my mother would tell me, that was her favorite book that I did, and when was I ever going to draw those little cars again?
And then,
but I'm afraid it didn't come around.
I guess that was your first foray into like humorous type stuff, or was E-Man that? I was going to ask about E-Man, because E-Man has some humor in it, I thought. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think Wheelie came before E-Man.
Okay.
Yeah, but E-Man, that was with Nick Cuddy, and pretty much Nick's idea, and we had Plastic Man to look at as a model when we were working on E-Man. So we had a good mix of action and humor. So Nick had some really colorful characters there. So it was a mix. I think it worked. It keeps on coming around.
And then during that time, I know that Mike Curtis, when I interviewed him, he said that you proposed the idea of doing Dick Tracy a long time before you actually started. Were you even thinking of it as far back as the 70s, or was that just like a pipe dream because Chester Gould was still at the helm?
It would have. I didn't really try out or anything for Tracy till after Chester Gould was off the strip.
Okay.
I think I tried out, it must have been in the 80s. Every once in a while, there would be a rumor coming around that, Tracy was opening up for new people, and, but, Rick Fletcher was doing a great job, and there was no opening until we actually got it. So, and then Rick died, and Dick Loker came in, so they kept on going.
Mm-hmm. And, go ahead. Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
Okay. Okay, we're back to talking in turn now.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. And so Mike Curtis did say that you had the idea to do Dick Tracy. Was that because it did become available eventually, or you just had it in the back of your mind over years of working through comic books and things like that?
Well, like I said, I mean, Tracy was kind of the first thing I ever wanted to do, and it was always in the back of my mind. I always, wanted my shot at Tracy, and occasionally something would come up when I was working at DC in the 80s. We proposed, and DC was doing the really great Batman animated books. We proposed doing Tracy as a team up with Batman, and having Max Collins write it and Terry Beattie ink it and me pencil it, and Mike Gold was going to edit it, and it actually made some progress at DC, and eventually it was a time when the Trib didn't have very good lawyers, and they kind of killed the whole thing. But we gave it a good bit of talking, and it kind of had a possibility there for a while, and I think it would have made a great team up, Tracy and Batman adventures, but didn't turn out.
Is there any chance that might be revived at any point, or is it pretty much dead due to all the legal things? And
I don't know. It might actually be an idea that's still around. Various people will occasionally want to publish something, Tracy stories or something. And we do an awful lot of crossovers with different characters in the strip. Yeah. So, I figure, if we can do crossovers with Snuffy Smith and the Spirit, Batman's, not out of reason. So, somebody might decide one day that's a great idea and might actually get us to do it. I don't know, but it would be good.
And you said you were always a fan. So when did you start reading Dick Tracy?
When did I start reading? Before I could read. I was, following Tracy and the comic strips really before I could read. I think I actually started to read. My father taught me to read with Superboy comics. So, we'd go through Superboy, I'd read Superboy, and so I guess, around that time I started actually reading the strips. So, I don't know, what kind of age would that have been, 5 maybe, I guess.
We're talking like the 1940s or something like that, 50s?
Yeah, I was born in 48.
Okay,
so figure, 52, maybe 51, I don't know. But, pretty early.
Yeah.
So I think I probably, had to learn to read so that I know what was going on in the strips, so.
And was that the only strip you were attracted to, or were you just attracted to just newspaper strips in general?
I'm attracted really to newspaper strips in general. It just always seemed like a really good way to tell stories, and I was always just attracted to the form. One picture after another, and you get a week's worth, and it tells a story. But things particular I really liked. I liked all the, whatever Milton Caniff was doing. I liked Little Abner a lot. Flash Gordon, I think Mac Raboy was doing it back then. Liked Steve Roper. I liked that a lot. A lot of stuff, and sometimes things kind of some of the teenage strips, the Jackson Twins, various things like that. So, and Mary Worth. I actually liked Mary Worth a lot those days. It was really well drawn, although it's really well drawn now with June Brisbane and Roy Richardson doing it. So, but I really like those old strips. So,
and when did you?
Tracy was always my favorite.
Okay. And I assume you did this as you started probably drawing your own versions of it, or at least the characters. When did you kind of realize you had kind of artistic talent?
When did I decide I wanted to do it?
Well, I mean, more like I always hear about like Charles Schulz when he was young. He drew pictures of Popeye and stuff because he really liked Popeye. So, if you like Dick Tracy, when do you think the earliest times you probably drew the characters, or was that just when you got the story? Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I was actually drawing strips by 8 or 9, somewhere around like that. So, and I was drawing characters from the comic books as well by that time. I really liked the Julie Schwartz science fiction books, Strange Adventures, Mystery in Space, various things like that. So I was always drawing the aliens and spaceships and such like things. And I was always doing it one way or another.
And let's see, I'm going to ask you some historical questions about Dick Tracy. If you don't know him, I mean, I asked these of Mike Curtis, and he knew them all, but he's a pretty good expert on the character and everything. Mike is the authority. He's actually, I believe Mike has actually read all of the Dick Tracy strips. He claims he has, which is a tremendous feat. It's not as difficult now that it used to be because they've started reprinting them. But that is a question. Since they've started reprinting them and you're working on it, have you gone back to reread or reread those from the 30s and on just to see what was going on back then?
Oh yeah, and we use those books for reference. IDW sends a batch to the Trib, and the Trib breaks them down, and it sends out copies to the crew, and we bring in a lot of the older characters, and we have flashbacks to the stories. So it's really handy having the IDW books, and they're almost up through Gould's run. So that's what we depend on a lot. And one other thing that's really great for reference is you can always read Dick Tracy at gocomics.com/Dick Tracy. And not only do they post the current strips that Mike and I are doing one a day, and they have archives, and we can always just check up on the archives at Go Comics and see what we need. There's a gap between Gould and the Loker material on Go Comics, but it covers an awful lot of stuff, and we depend on that a lot.
Now, you say there's a gap there. Do you know why? Is it just because they haven't gotten around to scanning them in or something, or is there a reason?
I'm sorry?
You say there's a gap there. Is it because they've just not gotten around to scanning them, or is there any other reason why they would not post those strips as well?
Yeah, I don't really know what their reason is. That they just go back to I don't know. I guess they go back to the start of the 2000s or so. So we don't have like the Killian strips that are that handy. Mike has them, printed out from I think somebody collected them. So there is there is a gap there. A lot of Rick Fletcher's stuff that with Max Collins, that's been reprinted. So that's available, and I really depend on that a lot. Rick Fletcher, really knew how to draw, and great with guns, and so we depend a lot on those reprints as well, checkers and such like. So yeah, so there's really not a lot of Tracy that's not available one way or another right now.
And what era do you tend to like of the previous Dick Tracy strips, or even just the Chester Gould years? Do you like the earlier strips, or do you like the ones that you read as a kid, or later stuff?
I guess I would like the stuff that I read as a kid, and especially what I liked was Harvey Comics did reprints of the Tracy material.
Right.
They did some nice reprints. The sequence of Joe Period and the Son of Flat Top was two stories that really worked. One kind of went to the other, and so that was one I really liked in the Harvey books, and I still think it's really good stuff. And I think that was originally published like in the mid-50s. Yeah, I'm pretty sure about that. And that was really good.
Now, I have a few of the Harvey Dick Tracy books, and I also have a few strip collections, but I haven't really compared side by side. I assume you've seen both probably more thoroughly than I have. Was there any sort of censorship involved when it got into the Harvey books, or did they pretty much run them as is?
Well, I'm pretty sure Mike's mentioned it to you. There were. It was kind of odd. There would be things like somewhere where somebody would be sucked into some machinery, which would have been actually shown pretty clearly in the strip, but the black and white art would have been blurred out or erased for the Harvey books. So you just wind up with like a color blur.
One of the things I talked to Mike about is just kind of the inventions over the years. What was your what was like the origins of that? I mean, he did kind of go over it, like the two-way wrist radio and things like that. And do you have any thoughts about those type of inventions?
Well, I guess Mike probably explained that the two-way radio was came after World War II, and Gould was realizing a lot of things were being miniaturized, and he was just thought miniaturizing a walkie-talkie would be a good thing for the police to have. So it kind of started from there. It had all kinds of occasional, the atom blast, the flash that to blind people when you were going to rob them or something. So, and actually, a lot of Tracy's material in the 50s was things that are very very normal now that were actually real, but were just being kind of put into the story. A lot of surveillance material and things for voice recognition. A lot of that. A lot of Gould stuff was very very authentic.
Do you think he put that in there because he felt that would someday be reality, or is he just trying to be like kind of science fiction or something like that?
Well, at the first, I don't think he thought of it being science fiction. He just thought it would be something that would be expected in police work, especially as it actually did turn up in police work. He worked with police agencies and tried to get very authentic techniques for investigations. And it wasn't always that that Tracy shot the bad guy. That sometimes there was track him down, arrest him. So so you needed proper procedures.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was a much more violent strip in the earlier days than later on. Or do you think it kind of stayed violent all throughout?
I'm sorry there?
Well, I was saying, do you think it was a more violent strip early on, or was it violent all along? Or did it get kind of toned down as the years went on?
Well, it certainly got turned down a lot as time went on. The original idea for Tracy was to be violent. That was Chester Gould's marching orders from Captain Patterson. He said, when they hired Gould to do the police strip, that when you shoot somebody, I want him shot in the head, and I want to see the bullet come out of the back of his head. Which was that was Gould's orders.
Wow.
So, and that was we have to tone down the violence, obviously, these days. But that's something a Tracy trademark that I do miss is the old bullet to the front of the head just wobbling out with a few blood splatters out the back. So, but it had its own charm.
Mm-hmm. When you're doing this,
people were being machine gun right and left, and various people died in horrible ways. And, it was always part of the strip.
Yeah. And Mike was saying too that a lot of times when certain villains like Flat Top Senior were dead, they remained dead. They didn't come back in some weird way. They're gone. Yeah.
Well, I think the rule is that we can bring back. Well, our own self-imposed rule is that we can bring back anybody we want to, except Flat Top Senior.
Oh.
Basically as long as Mike comes up with some clever way to bring them back. Most anybody come back, but Flat Top is like the ultimate Tracy villain. So he deserves the respect of staying dead. With Flat Top, although Flat Top Senior is totally dead, and we are committed to keeping him dead, he has a large family.
Yes,
and various members of the family show up fairly often. Angel Top and Blow Top. We recently brought back Mrs. Flat Top, who was an extremely vicious lady who died in a very ironic way. But unfortunately, she's dead now. Although I think we could probably figure out a good way to bring her back. I really liked her. And of course there was Flat Top Junior,
right,
who died. But, the family keeps on coming back. So, and I hear there are plans for a character called Over the Top, who is like Vitamin Flint Top, Vitamin Flint Heart, who is a ham actor who is known for his over the top. So over the top acting, and Vitamin's a regular character. Might run into him. So a lot of the Top family keep on coming around.
When you're working on the strips with Mike, do you just let him do the writing, or do you come up with ideas yourself, or give him any sort of guidance when he's coming up with new ideas?
Basically, Mike does the writing. He will generally, run ideas past me and, see if I have any objection to something he's coming up with. But usually it's Mike, and occasionally I'll talk him out of killing somebody that I think, deserves another run. That's basically my input.
Yeah.
Well, she's credited as inker and letterer, but Shelley Plager is kind of our editor in-house, and she has a good idea of what actually is rational, what works in the real world, and she's good on catching things where we'll have things happening in the dead of night, and then we'll forget, and it'll be daylight, and the little things that she's really good on catching all this, and we depend to a great degree on Shelley. So it's a team. We all keep an eye on things, and then, but basically the stories all come from Mike.
Okay. And, yeah, you kind of answered one question. I was just saying, is there anything you object to? And, yeah, I could see killing off a character that you're like, no, let's not kill them off. I want to draw them. Do you ever do any sort of flashback sequences or anything like that, in order to get, using Flat Top Senior again or any other characters, or is that like a cop-out?
No, we will do that. When we first took over the strip, not too far in, we did a flashback to Tracy's original, his first case when he joined the force. Before he was actually a detective, and in one way or another, we had a lot of the classic characters turning up, just for a strip or two, kind of checking in with them, reminding people of what everything was. But so we had a good bit of flashback there, and we'll occasionally have other flashbacks to kind of catch people up to speed as to who a character is or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Shelley Plager. I've met with her. She actually lives locally to me here in Oregon. And I don't know if you knew this, she did the cover of my one of my Harvey books. So, and actually illustrated a story that Mike published for Shanda. Actually, it was Atomic Mouse. It was for his Shanda publishing company.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
So, yeah. Go ahead.
Shelley told me one time, Tracy is fine, but her real loves in comics were Hot Stuff and Wendy the Good Little Witch.
Yeah.
So we hope sometime, to get Hot Stuff to make an appearance for Shelley.
Yeah, she really enjoyed. I don't know if you've ever seen the cover, but I just gave her the direction: put all the major characters you can think of on the cover doing something, and she gave me a couple ideas. But the ultimate cover shows all the different Harvey characters reading the Harveyville Fun Times, which was my fanzine. So
cool.
And
yeah, she doesn't take much, doesn't need much directions. So
no,
she's
no.
She could come up with all sorts of things on her own.
Right. And it's good. I should probably interview her next, since she does like the inking and everything, and does your continuity. So that's kind of a major task, just to keep everything, under control. It sounds like.
She tried. Gould also had problems with characters suddenly changing clothes in the middle of a strip or something like that, and Shelley tries to keep us aware of things like that. So she's very, very handy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned Chester Gould. Let's just go back to him. I said this to Mike, too, and he talked a little bit about this, but, when I was a kid, I always thought that everybody did a comic strip similar to, like, Charles Schultz and Peanuts, all by himself, no help, no assistance, nothing. But Chester had some help. So who were the type of people that assisted him on his strip during those years?
Well, he had a great setup. He bought a farm in Woodstock, Illinois, which fortunately I've been out to visit thanks to the Woodstock Fire Department. And he set up a barn as a studio. various people at various times. He had quite a crew out there. I think his brother helped with the lettering, and he had somebody inking. He had a police consultant. We have a police consultant. We first had Jim Doherty, and now we have Walt Reimer, and so we keep that going. That's part of our crew to have have a police consultant. And Gould would actually plot the stories one day at a time. He and his crew would kind of settle in for the day and figure out, what happens today? And that's how the stories were written.
Wow, so he really didn't know where the conclusion would be. It'd just be like, well, we're just doing today.
That's right.
Wow.
And apparently there was a time they wrote themselves into a mystery they couldn't get out of.
Uh-oh.
Dick Tracy was trapped inside I guess it was a burned out volcano, and the water was rising. I don't remember how he got out of that, but it's kind of well known as, that's one they couldn't figure out. So, but obviously Tracy survived.
Yes. Do you know approximately what year that was? Is that something you could reference in a book or find to see where?
It's in the IDW books, but okay. I think it was in the 50s.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to research that and look that up. That'd be interesting to find out how they resolved it.
You can check with Mike. He will tell you the day.
Probably, yes. So this is a kind of a double-edged question, but it's the same. How far ahead did Chester and his group work on strips, and then present day, how far ahead do you and Mike and everybody work on strips?
I don't think I've actually seen how often the Gould crew, how far ahead they had to work. But,
okay.
Probably they had to work further ahead than we do, because everything was very mechanical in those days, and they actually had to make mats to send around for the reproduction of the strips. You couldn't just send it out by email or anything, and so they probably had to allow quite a bit more time than we do.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, I always tell people that for the Sundays, we are supposed to have the strips finished 6 weeks ahead of time.
Okay.
And for the dailies, 4 weeks ahead of time, and that should allow us enough time, to get everything to the syndicate and shot out around the country. We have had occasional problems when things will be backed up for one reason or another, where we've had to do a week's worth of continuity overnight and get it out the next morning. But we don't want to make a habit of that, and when we do that, we get our pay docked, so that's motivation. So
yes.
keep on to the schedule, and everything goes better. But if we weren't in the age of computers, there have been times we would have had a lot of trouble. So because as you know, Mike is in the middle of a field in Arkansas. I'm in upstate New York. Shelley's obviously is Oregon, and Shane, the colorist, is outside of Detroit. Our editor, Tracy, is at the Trib in Chicago, and I think the syndicate is actually in Dallas now.
Oh wow!
So if we weren't able to move things around, immediately, there's no way we'd get this done.
Yeah.
But Chester Gould, like I was saying, he had as many people as we have, but he had them all in a barn.
Right.
And,
That's funny.
in Woodstock, Illinois. So we have the same people, same number of people. They're just all over the country. So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, and I didn't even ask Mike this, so it didn't even occur to me that everybody was all over the country. So what is the process? So I assume Mike comes up with the idea first, and then it gets to you. So what is the process of doing a strip, Sunday or daily?
Okay, well, the Sundays I'll actually ink on paper, very old school, and Shelley inks the dailies. I ink the Sundays, she inks the dailies. She inks those digitally. But to start with, Mike will come up with an idea. Sometimes he'll tell me, what he's got in mind, or check with any ideas I might want to throw in. But basically, Mike will come up with the idea. He will check in with the trip at Tracy, and he will start writing. The way he writes is to do kind of little storyboards, which I think he learned working at Harvey.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that he will. First, he runs those by the trib, see if everything is okay there. If he's not gone off into something that's totally not acceptable, and they will. Usually, it says okay, no problem, and then they'll say. Sometimes they'll say, this is a direction we don't really want to get into, and but usually it's just go ahead with the strip. Then he keeps on, and he will write. Write and sketch his storyboards, and he'll scan those, and he'll send those to me, and I'll use his storyboards and elaborate them, and do finish pencils for the dailies, and I'll do the inks for the Sundays, and then from there I'll scan the pencils for the dailies and send those on to Shelley, and she'll ink them and letter them. She picks up the lettering from his storyboards, so she'll do finished art there, and that all goes through the syndicate. And for the Sundays, I'll send the finished inks scans of those to Shelley, and she'll drop in the lettering and send that on to Shane, and he'll color them.
Oh, okay.
And that goes back through back to the trip. So it's everything goes kind of by everybody. Everybody gets scans of everything at every stage. Walt Raymer, does the Crime Stoppers, and we have features Hall of Fame, first responders, and first responders who've died in line of duty. So we'll he contributes those. They go into to the Sunday strips, and so eventually it all comes together.
A couple questions on that process. So you say you still ink the Sunday strips on paper. Are you doing it on a board or literal paper? What type of ink and pen, or pen and ink and paper do you use?
Actually, what I use now is our comic strip boards from Casson Paper, Cason.
Okay.
So it has borders that match up to comic strips, and I pretty much in the same proportion as for the strips. So it's very handy. I'll draw on that, and I'll do my inking. It's kind of a mix of markers and pens and old Winsor Newton brushes. Can't get the good ink anymore, but we do what we can. So that's the problem. I'm sure you've heard that the the good materials are no longer available.
Right.
Do the best you can. So, So my part of it is very old school. Mike's is, when it gets to Shelley and to Shane, it moves into the modern era.
Right. And you said Mike does storyboards. Do you try to emulate, or does he position the characters, or do any sort of layout that you're trying to follow, or do you have free reign to position the characters wherever you feel works best?
I pretty much have free reign on what I want to do. Basically, Mike has enough to tell me what's happening in the story. Sometimes it works fine. I just pick up with Mike with what Mike's done, and I'll just kind of finish it off. And sometimes between me and Shelley, we'll completely restage a sequence or something, and that all goes to Mike to see if it's okay with him, and he usually says, "Oh yeah, no problem."
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I was wondering if you had the free reign. I mean, I don't know, if Harvey Kurtzman was pretty meticulous, that people would have to follow his exact layouts, on different stories he did, if somebody else was drawing it. So I didn't know how Mike was on that.
Yeah, I have seen the write-ups, the very little work that Alex Toth did for Kurtzman. They had problems there. So some writers, insist you follow everything, and some see basically is what they give you as kind of a suggestion, a well thought out suggestion, but subject to changes. And Mike's agreeable to improvements or adjustments, and actually so am I. When Shelley finds something needs fixing, she has all of the abilities to fix it. I realized we started realizing that what Shelley had many abilities. We had one of our history of police panels for the Crime Stoppers. My reference showed the character in a World War I uniform. He actually needed to be in a Mountie uniform, and oh golly, Shelley just drew him in a Mountie uniform. So that was just what it needed. And then when we were first starting, I got a note from Shelley. Says, "Joe, this character you've drawn Sparkle, it's actually supposed to be Tess. Is it okay if I just change it?" And I said, "Oh yeah." So she just does that. So, she's very handy.
We keep mentioning the Crime Stoppers textbook, and how much input does everybody have on that, or is it pretty much you just draw a little image for it and it's already written? How do those appear in the strip?
Well, those are the police consultant. It was Jim and now it's Walt, and they do the research, and they'll come up with every year a few pages of Crime Stopper advice, and a lot of it's classic, like don't walk in dark places by yourself, stuff like that. But a lot, the last few years, a lot of it's been computer based, and warning people not to let the kiddies go online by themselves too much. So,
right.
A lot of it's that sort of thing. And then we have Hall of Fame and Roll of Honor. Hall of Fame is cops who've and firemen, and actually firefighters for the Forest Service. Who've done above and beyond. And then there's the Roll of Honor, which is the same first responders who've died in action. So we just now are putting up the firemen who was the 200th casualty to die of exposure to the toxins at 9/11.
Wow.
So we keep up with all this, and occasionally some of us will have some input on something to put in there, but basically that comes from the police consultant.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you try to tie in all these little bonus features to the strip, or is it just like its own thing that you just paste along the top?
Well, basically it's its own thing, but there will be occasions when you really can't avoid tying in things. When, especially with our crossovers, we'll have stories with other featuring other artists, characters, and stories, and we'll rather than a Crime Stopper, we'll have a Cartoonist Hall of Fame, and we did a crossover with Felix Fosdick, Fearless Fosdick.
Yeah.
And, so for we had two Cartoonist Hall of Fame. We had Chester, had Al Cap, obviously, did Little Abner, which started Fosdick, and then when we did the reprint, we had a fictional Cartoonist Hall of Fame, Lester Gooch. Was supposedly the real artist behind Fearless Fosdick.
Right.
So we had a takeoff Al Cap's drawing of Lester Gooch to be the Cartoonist Hall of Fame. So when we did the crossover with the Spirit, we had a nice drawing of Will Eisner. Dennis Kitchen wrote us a little bio of Will. Yeah, so we do that. And, there have been times when there will be little history things or something, but we have a formula, but we're willing to vary it.
How did the crossover idea start? And what was the first one that you did? If you remember?
Oh, wow. It was certainly something Mike came up with. When I started, I had no idea this was going to be a part of the strip. I thought we were, just doing ongoing stories, but apparently it had always been part of Mike's plan to bring in various crossovers. I'm trying to remember Oh, yes, I remember. It was, I think, in the very, first month or so of the strip. If you remember, the Shadow has a backup crew, and one of them is a taxi driver. One of who gets the Shadow around town, and we just happened to have I've forgotten the character's name, Shermy, something like that. Yeah. But I've forgotten the character's name right now. But he was driving a cab, just right off the bat.
And in any of these crossovers, a couple questions about it. Do you ever have any difficulties drawing those characters?
Usually not.
Okay.
A lot of the things are just kind of in my style. It's ask me to draw Al Cap, that's no problem. I always draw like Al Cap.
Okay.
But we did a crossover. Vitamin Flintheart was in a production of King Lear, co-starring Mary Perkins on stage. And Mary Perkins is so well drawn. It's just totally intimidating figuring out, So I did best I could, but that was scary.
Oh, so hey.
To match up. Yeah. So usually, if it's standard comics, I can do it with not even worrying about it. But sometimes when the drawing is just amazingly good, I'm totally intimidated, and that was one.
And do you have to seek permission, like, you say the Spirit, like the Will Eisner estate or something like that, to use these characters? How does that work?
Yeah, we definitely have to check into legal permissions and anything like that. A lot of the material are things that Trib owns, so we have access to anything that's a Trib property.
Okay.
And that covers Mary Perkins and Terry and the Pirates and Little Orphan Annie. I mean, Annie is now a supporting character in the Tracy strip. But sometimes, if it's not a Trib character, we talk to Mike tracks down who is the legal owner and talks to them and gets permission. And with the Spirit and Fearless Fosdick, Dennis Kitchen represents those properties and is in good contact with the estate. So Dennis arranged for us to do those, and we were really pleased with how that turned out. And Dennis is a great help.
Has there been anybody that said absolutely not, no, that you've tried to do a crossover with?
Not to my knowledge. I think there have been times when Mike wasn't actually able to nail down who owned the property, and we couldn't do anything there.
Okay.
But generally, I don't think anybody's ever turned us down flat. Oh yes. There was one. I'm not sure. At one point, we tried to see if Stan Lee could guest star, and Stan's representative said no, his rights were tied up, so we couldn't guest star Stan.
Wow.
But other than that, I can't think of anybody.
Yeah. And one thing Mike said, you mentioned Little Orphan Annie, is that apparently the real Little Orphan Annie strip kind of left on a cliffhanger or something, and you guys were able to resolve that cliffhanger in the Dick Tracy strip. Is that correct?
That's right. The Annie strip was canceled just after Annie had been kidnapped by I think Guatemalan pirates. So she was left at great stress. So Mike thought we really should figure out what had happened to Annie and have Tracy save her. So although I think the way it worked out, Annie actually saved Tracy, but they both came through okay.
Now, it's still a couple years away, but, I assume that the strip will be around in 2 more years when it's Dick Tracy's 90th anniversary. Is there any plans in the strip or outside of the strip just for any major celebrations or anything like that?
I'm sure Mike has plans. He's mentioned something that I'm sure we'll have to come up with a spectacular story for the 90th birthday. That's got to be observed.
And then he did mention also that you guys put together a free comic book like every year or a couple times a year or something for convention purposes and stuff. Are you still doing those? Yep.
Still doing that. I'm giving out the collection of the crossover with the Spirit now. We figure there was not too many people see the strip on newspaper, in a newspaper, on newsprint, on a newspaper the way it's supposed to be, the way God intended. But a lot of people actually follow the strip online, especially at Go Comics. So we like I said, we depend on them a lot. But we do collections of various stories, and we'll have them at cons and give them out to people so they can see what the strip looks like on paper, on newsprint. To really get the actual feel of how such things are meant in the old days. One problem Mike ran into when he was arranging the printing this last time. It is really hard to get really cheap, crummy newsprint these days. So we wound up having to print on a slightly better grade of newsprint than we actually intended.
Oh, wow.
So, we got as close as we could, but it doesn't crumble in your hands the way a real newspaper would in those days. So, but it's on paper. It looks right. We will keep on doing it. It's good.
And it sounds like you all are loved by the syndicate, and you all still like doing it. So are you all planning to just continue doing the strip for an indefinite amount of years at this point?
That varies day to day. There are days when I'm ready to have Tracy around for his 100th and 20th birthday, but there are days when I think he'll be lucky to make it to the end of the week. Depends on how far behind I am. And,
But you still enjoy doing it. You still enjoy drawing his adventures, right?
I do enjoy drawing Tracy. I do comic books for years, and usually when I get a script, it would take a while to sit down and start drawing, figuring out what I was supposed to be doing in that story. But with Tracy, no matter what it is, I can just put it on the board and start drawing it. So had a lifetime to figure out how to do it. So it just kind of comes naturally.
Do you work on any other projects now, or is it pretty much all Dick Tracy at this point?
Well, Tracy pretty much takes up most of my time. One thing that I'm trying to work on, but it's hard to get the time to get it done, is my buddy Chris Mills is starting a really homegrown project of Atomic Comics, and he's decided to write and publish the comics that he really wants to do, which is, DC comics from the 60s. So he has a lot of new material, but in that style. And I'm supposed to be doing an issue of a book called Space Pirates, which has a lot of 60s characters, and some of them, none of them are recognizable, but they're certainly in that period. And I really want to get that done, and it's on the table, trying to get done.
And go ahead.
We're talking about other projects, not that I'm doing now, but I do want to put in a plug for a project called The Family Man, which was published just a few months ago. I guess about in the 90s. DC published some small-sized graphic novels, mostly crime-related. And I did a project with the novelist Jerome Charon. It's about it was called The Family Man. It's in a slightly very distorted future where New York City is in collapse, and the mob and the Catholic Church are in a struggle to control the city, and the leader of the mob and the leader of the church are brothers. So it's really, I think it's a really good project. It was done through IDW, and it's worth checking out. It's a good project. I like to plug it.
Okay.
It gets looks very different, but you can see traces of Dick Tracy in there.
Okay, very good. And then when I was interviewing Mike, he said you were the one who tended to make convention appearances. So are there any upcoming appearances by you at conventions?
Well, I'm planning to be at Baltimore. Let's see. I think that's the main thing I have coming up now. I'll be at an Albany show in November. Actually, I've made the New York show every year up until this year, and it conflicted too much with Baltimore.
Oh.
But so I try to hit some good sized shows to give out the sample books.
Mm-hmm. All right, and if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way, or website, or?
Well, I do have a website, joestaton.com, and I'm on Facebook. Actually, if you message me on Facebook, that's usually the best way to get me.
All right, and I guess that's all the questions I have. I want to thank you for being a guest with me today. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Joe Staton, for being my special guest. Episode number 46 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2019 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Popping creation pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your